Good Sunday morning, Substack friends. Welcome to the Substack channel. I'm here today with a very eminent gentleman, Mr. Eric Clark of rural Ontario. And I've known Eric for many years. And Eric has a very individual approach, unique approach to communication, to knowledge, to sharing of knowledge, perspectives on society. And I welcome you, Eric, to the Substack.
No, thank you, Hugh. Happy to be here.
It's a little bit early on a Sunday morning, but how does your voice feel? Are you awake yet?
I'm a morning person, but yeah, the voice is a little weak today.
Well, we can just go easy. I really like these conversations, as I call them, or authentic dialogues, to be relaxing and to contain something that will appeal to people's curiosity and maybe some resonate with either questions people have or confirm some ideas that people already hold, or explore the territory a little bit more. And one question I often ask people, anybody in whatever background, is I'm really interested myself in the spiritual journey, you could call it, or the evolutionary path of how we proceed from one stage to another in our life. So the question is, have you ever had a turning point? That phrase seems to be coming up a lot lately since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But it's a great phrase, turning point. Have you ever had a turning point in your life or a moment of aha or epiphany, eureka, where you had an experience that sort of put you in a different direction in relation to your awareness or consciousness?
Well, when I go back to early days of studying, I had too many interests. And so I was constantly visiting different libraries, attending free lectures, and so on. And I thought there's just no end to what I can learn. And at one point, I was introduced to the Baha'i teachings, which talked about basically a global solution for humanity. And from then on, I started to think, how do all these parts fit into the whole? All the different theories and ideas and so on, how do they resonate with the whole? So that's been a theme that continued to animate my life.
Thank you very much. How do they all fit into the whole? Right. And also, I want to mention to the vast audience out there in Substack land that Eric calls himself a consumer advocate, and in a world of specialists, is a generalist. So that's an interesting way to describe yourself. So, how has that insight or that question, curiosity, I guess, that was instigated at that time in your life, how has that come to manifest in your activities, your studies, and your associations and relationships? I know you do a lot of communication online with groups of people.
Well, this idea of generalist just refers to broad interests. And there was a very strong force operating to get people to become specifically skilled in one area, what I refer to as a specialist. And I don't know how it didn't happen to me. I didn't go down a specific channel like that. And the epiphany occurred for me when I first left Canada to live in another culture, because then I could look back and examine how I grew up and what the thinking was in my cultural world, and then realize that in other cultures, they had a different view it was what I'd call more focused on the collective than on the individual.
Mhm. Mhm.
And years later, returning to Canada, I suffered a lot looking for the collective.
Mhm. Interesting. I know you spent some time in Africa, and I myself spent 5 years in South America, and I also remember on returning almost immediately, like within an hour, there was a cultural shock. Holy moly, this is the culture I come from. Um, it took a while to adapt again, readapt. Mm.
And all the commentary before was that culture shock was when you go somewhere else to a
Yeah,
different culture. And
exactly.
you and I are describing the culture shock of returning,
The reverse, yeah. Hmm. So it's
which
interesting that, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say it's a lonely thing because
Mhm.
you're on your own having that experience. Whereas if you were in a
Yeah,
busload of people touring Europe, you can be sharing the
yeah,
differences and then the
right, right, right.
experience. And I did spend a year in Europe, in Switzerland before we
Uh-huh.
went to Africa. So I was in a culture that had 1,000 years of history,
Mm.
and that was different.
Right. And then, of course, we have the oral history of indigenous people, for example, most
Mhm.
indigenous First Nations, as we say. I had a guest from Argentina, psychiatrist Daniel Ferioli, several months ago, and he spent a fair bit of time in Mexico among the Otomi indigenous people, whom I was fortunate to visit once when I was doing
Mm.
some marketing in Mexico on a little side trip. But that was one of his observations, is that there's much less a sense of the individual, me. It's more we. So if a decision is made in the council or whatever institution they might have, it's always about what's beneficial for the community, for the group, not an individual. That comes secondary.
Mhm. So, in the colonial and post-colonial era, there was this idea that you'd be privileged to go to a certain school and get a certain qualification to go
Mhm.
back and be useful in your home community. Uh, what it seemed to have done is create conflict in a person's mind between advancing based on individual merit and responding to the needs of the collective.
Yes. Yeah. There's a, when I was in Egypt, uh, one of my colleagues there used the word anomie. It's a sociological term, Anomie, in reference to the a large um, Sudanese population that were refugees living in the outskirts of Cairo. And it's when one is thrust into another culture or another culture's dominant culture is thrust upon oneself,
Mhm.
one, even though one has not yet inseminated himself into the new culture or is not accepted even fully because of race, religion, or whatever. Um, at the same time, there's this grief of losing the other culture. And I guess it means the means outside of without no me, and the no me might be name or identity. So there's a real
Yes.
crisis of identity there when one is sort of betwixt and between, sort of like people that are in the in-between space, biracial, for example, or
Yes.
transgender, perhaps, um, not accepted by either the new or the old fully. So it can be very lonely and terrifying, especially if there are, government policies that persecute or exclude those demographics.
So we each wake up every day um, feeling a sense of control over our activities, and that usually dissipates by early afternoon as we get called to do different things or we're responding to
Right?
other events.
Yeah.
Um, and I call it the illusion of control. That
Yeah.
if we're striving for it, we're constantly trying to recreate yesterday and not be curious about the next day.
Right.
And in North America, if I can use that broad term, we have created a sense of self-sufficiency, personal prosperity, and so on that reinforces this idea that everything works and I'm in charge and I
Right.
can press the button or pull the string or whatever and get a result. And for those of us who have experienced other parts of the
Mhm.
world, um, we didn't think like that during those
Mhm.
periods.
Mhm.
For example, I recall a commercial transport
Mhm.
uh, was a truck that was already overloaded when you wanted to get a ride, and it wouldn't necessarily leave at a certain time, and it wouldn't necessarily go exactly where
Yeah,
you thought it was going.
that's right.
So learning to live with uncertainty
Mhm.
brings you back to the moment, what's happening in this moment, as opposed to when I get there, I'm going to
Yes.
accomplish this or that.
Yes. Yeah. It's so different, really. I remember when I was in Paraguay, where there has been even more than many Latin American countries, perhaps, um, separation of the elite, the rich people and the poor people was, and a lot of injustice, tyranny, dictatorship over many years. And I asked a friend of mine, a Paraguayan, he was a lawyer who he'd been the leader of an opposition party at one point, and whose party had been persecuted, and at times people had been thrown in jail or executed, even tortured. And asked him, I said, Jorge, how, after a whole lifetime of being in this society and seeing so much injustice, how do you handle it? How do you manage that without, going crazy or throwing a bomb or something? He said, well, you learn to just sort of swallow it, accept it, and at the same time not lose your principles. You keep doing what you can within the context of what's possible, and you become patient. And yes, there's anger, uh, like the embers in a fire, perhaps. It's glowing there all the time, but so that's sort of an extreme example of tyranny and injustice. But those little things, like you say, like the bus not leaving on time and a lot of uncertainty and chaos, that I find that people in those societies are much, it's easier for them to adapt quickly to changes. I live in the middle of quite a Tony area of Toronto, uh, Yorkville and Rosedale, and there's so much money. Not that I have it, but my building is like a little, not a slum, but in the middle of all these expensive neighborhoods. But it's almost every brick is in place, every sidewalk is swept. Everything is beautiful to the eye. Little trees are planted. There's so much control. And then the farther and farther you go out from that core of money and the possibilities, then things get a little bit more chaotic in some of the suburbs or the.
Mm.
So I'm going to come around to the topic that you said you would like to share about or discuss about scripts and living from a script or living from life. That's
Well,
a
it,
great
it,
theme. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
it comes from this idea of control
Yeah.
that when you're following a script, whether it's a cultural script or family script or a corporate script, you're complying with a certain formula. And uh, if you do well, you're praised or rewarded in some way. If you step outside that script, you maybe get some friction or some resistance from people around you. Since I've been self-employed most of my life, I tend to be making it up as I go, as opposed to following somebody else's dictates.
Yeah.
So my general theme that I focus on a lot is context before content. And so as we talk about culture, we're talking about context. And then the content is the activity of the day or the particular aspirations of the person or whatever. And what I've noticed happening in our world, in Canada or North America, that we have gone from having a more relaxed society where Sunday used to be a day off. It was a family day. It was a day of relaxing and stepping away from the routines. And in the 80s, something called Sunday shopping happened. And that broke the spell. There were already people who were shift workers working in service industries and so on a Sunday, but we didn't change for them until Sunday shopping opened. And it became, well, it's the retail consumer, therefore it's everybody who chooses to go. And at that point, we still had phones and mail. And so getting in your car was a way of communicating. And then in the 90s, as personal computing came along and the internet was available, we started to have an option to interact with others 24/7. Never mind retail shopping hours. This is 24/7. And yet, email is quite gentle because it doesn't demand a response. And then we moved into the mobile internet in the early 2000s, and that became more urgent because you knew the person was carrying the device.
Uh-huh.
And then a few years later, social media blossomed, and it brought in not just the texting, but the imagery and the video content. And so what I'm suggesting by this progression from the early 80s to present is that we've filled every waking moment with something you either create or respond to. And therefore, to step back and have a moment of reflection is almost a rebellious act.
Yes. So zooming right into the current time, which you have so nicely brought us up to, there are a lot of differing experiences and opinions about a lot of them very negative. Like what you're suggesting now is that we don't have any open time or downtime. We're not relaxed. There's a lot of tension and stress, and I'm a body worker and a psychotherapist, so I can vouch for that firsthand. But what would you say are, as well as the negatives of having the technology, and now there's artificial intelligence, which whoop takes us a whole nother leap. What are the benefits of having all this information at our fingertips and having the option of speaking with a friend halfway around the world, free, and seeing many, many different versions of the truth? What would be the benefits as well as the negatives, if you could just sort of flesh that out a little bit from your perspective?
Well, we begin with the idea that there's endless choice of what to do with our time, what to read or what to view, who to talk to. So that becomes a personal challenge. And I'm not saying it's an unhappy one, but nevertheless, any given day, you and I have been friends for years, and if we have a chat every 2 or 3 months, we're okay with that because we're busy doing our own activities. There's other people I need to talk to every week for different reasons. And so once again, I have to organize the content so it doesn't spoil my context of healthy living,
Hmm.
if I can put it in those terms. Now, the other thing with this progression of technology, we've gotten into shorter and shorter messaging. And that leads us to slogans, memes, use of jargon, made up terms, and so on. And the tendency is to adopt whatever's there because somebody else is using it or somebody else understands it. And that's part of the new script, that there is a script to do with short messaging. And there's even auto filling and self correcting and so on going on, which really drives you into that channel of complying with the script of the day.
So is that what you would
So,
call speaking from a script rather than speaking from life?
yes, it's not imposed by a person or a company or a government. It's become a cultural basket of jargon and slogans and shortcuts and nicknames and so on to try to reduce the time in messaging. Now, if you want to say something meaningful, you have to say, "Can I make an appointment with you on Tuesday?" It's getting that way. Um, the other, when I was thinking about this before this opportunity to talk with you, I was thinking about the term middle class, for example. The mass media uses certain terminology, and if you follow that, and I don't, but I follow a lot of independent media, but nevertheless, we've all been exposed to mass media. And when it refers to the middle class, it is not defining it. And I've noticed that middle implies there's upper and lower, but you never hear the term upper class or lower class. You hear the term for upper class, you hear the manager class, lower class, the working class. So it's interesting that somehow middle class works for somebody else who isn't either, you know,
Mm.
a laborer or a top level manager. And it's kind of an insult to just refer to us as a blob of middle class without the individuality that we deserve. And so I'm interested in how words get borrowed and redefined and misused. So that the scripting is in there,
Hmm.
that they're giving us terms. For example, you hear the term Middle East. Now, I don't know if you remember when the term Near East was abandoned, but years ago we used to refer to the Near East.
Well, a few
I
years
don't
ago, when
remember.
I was 60 years old, I went back to university and to do an undergraduate degree in peace and conflict studies. And we had to choose an area of interest, and I chose the Middle East. And the building
Right.
where several of my classes took place was called the Near and Middle Eastern Studies. So it covered both.
Oh,
Near East, the Near East. Yeah,
so
well, I guess as the global geopolitics and history and everything changes over the years, and wars and peace, and our concept of the planet, even the globe. You know, we have that picture from outer space now for a few decades now. That really changed our consciousness. One world, one people, please, one planet.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead.
So
The Near East, the
so
Middle
so
East.
back
Yeah.
back to this example. When I thought about it, Near East was a geographical term, and I took it meaning touching the Mediterranean, for example,
Mhm.
that Europe shared the Mediterranean with North Africa
Mhm.
and the Near East,
They used to call
not
it
with
Sorry for interrupting, but I tend to do that quite a bit. They also used to use the word the Levant, which is the French word for rising, because from Europe, it was a Eurocentric world, of course,
Yeah.
um, looking east, that's where the sun comes up. So the Levant would be those countries that were
Yeah.
closer to Europe. In other words, Lebanon, Turkey, Palestine, Israel now, Egypt,
Yeah.
perhaps,
But
Jordan,
you know,
Syria. Yeah.
if you're standing on a street in Tokyo, these terms might sound different. So, so just from our perspective, from the West, or even from Europe,
Yeah.
we are looking at that
Yeah.
complex of the
Mhm.
collection of countries whose borders were mostly defined by the colonial powers of Europe.
This is true. Yeah.
Um, and and today, with the phenomenal influence that Israel has exerted on the area, that Middle East now starts to mean a, a unified target for influence, if I can put it that way. That everybody who has any influence wants to affect that whole region, including, 8 or 10 countries.
Yes.
So this isn't a political statement. This is just saying that once we look at something as geography, and then we have to look at as economic zones, then we look at it as friendly neighbors or contentious neighbors.
Hmm.
It just depends which framework you're using, what that term will mean.
Hmm.
And in the news of the day, um, terms like China, Middle East, Russia, and so on have been given a very negative connotation because, in relation to Western powers, as they call them, there's something there that's not harmonizing. They're no longer agreeing to all the ideas that were born in the West. They're choosing different alliances and different cooperation with other partners. And that unity that they're expressing amongst other countries, often referred to as BRICS Plus, it's being portrayed as a negative in the West and a very positive thing in the East. So, just talking language here, we have to um, own our own limited perspective.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not I'm not trying to impose mine on you or anybody else, but I have to be comfortable with my perspective and then go, I'm really curious to meet somebody from there or from that language group. And with that curiosity comes learning, and with learning comes a hope of unity and collaboration.
Right. Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the identity theme. It's so important for people and peoples, tribes, and ethnic groups, and so on, to have a good, healthy sense of identity, almost like psychologically. For example, for a person in a helping profession, a counselor, a coach, a therapist, and so on, um, it's pretty hard to help other people if that individual doesn't know him or herself. So there has to be at least some degree of certainty and comfort and self-awareness before going out to save the world. So I think what you're saying sort of reflects that principle that if we can know our own culture, perhaps, and our background, and just who we are as an individual person, and we're all different, even though we're all the same, Unity University. So what I'm really interested in, language. I'm also extremely interested in language and communication. And as you probably remember, I've been very
Yeah.
involved with a project called the New Andalus Center for Authentic Dialogue, how we use language and what are the protocols of real uh, living from life rather than living from a script. And it also reminds me of Chogyam Trungpa, one of my teachers, I suppose. He was a Tibetan Lama, And in the book, the Shambhala Warrior or something like that, Spiritual Warrior, he said the spiritual warrior is someone who is courageous to go forward, stand up against injustice, um, has fear, but is able to transcend fear, but is never more than a hair's breadth away from um, sadness, tenderness, and vulnerability. And those qualities seem to me, for someone who wants to be able to be in the moment, live here now, as Ram Dass used to urge us to be in the moment and to be in that kind of improvisational space where we can go with the flow and resonate with many different realities, be flexible, see things from different perspectives, to be vulnerable ourselves. So, in your life and your development and personal growth and so on, how do you, what do you experience? What do you feel when you're talking more from a script? Because, we go back and forth, we can't help it, compared to when you're speaking from life, as you call it. What's the personal experiential manifestation of that?
Recently, I tried to illustrate this by drawing three circles, three concentric circles. And I wanted to test myself whether I was going to get wrapped up in the content, which is a whole lot of news and opinions and noise, basically, or was I able, in conversation with another person, to go closer to something that was practical that we could do together.
Hmm.
So I called the larger circle the what. What the heck is going on? What in the world? We have it in our language, right?
Yeah.
And the what is endlessly filled with news and noise and articles and secondhand opinions and so on. So I decided that I would choose, out of the many whats, I would choose 2 or 3 themes that I'm passionate about. And then when someone else would comment in that particular theme, I would engage them in a conversation. And they're not often used to people listening to what they say and being curious and responding to what they say. And then let them speak for a period of time to tell me what they're thinking on that particular theme. I mean, you mentioned health earlier. Health is a common theme, and people are either ignoring the essentials, or they're fearful about the outcomes, or whatever. It can be any number of things.
Mm-hmm.
So when the person brings up health, as a neighbor of mine did the other day, I'm asking him, what does that mean to you? What's your definition of this word health? And of course, he went on to tell me, and then he expressed concern for his wife's health. So you see, if I didn't ask him, I'd just be pitching my script on health. So then we go from what to how. And the question how is, how can we make a difference? How can we change this? How can we use this to our advantage? How can we do something together? It's just a different way of having a conversation to get away from all the noise of the opinions and the facts. And anyway, in my what circle, it's the big circle that surrounds us. And if you spend all your time there, you're never satisfied because it's just endless in content. But you go into how, which is the inner secondary concentric circle. How makes it personal, and as you're alluding to, makes it heartfelt. Sort of what inspires me, what connects me to you, a heartfelt connection. And then all of the other content either has to serve that or it gets discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And in the center of the circle is why. Why is, what is your motivation? What is your purpose? And if you really want a meaningful discussion with someone, ultimately you want to know where they're coming from, as we used to say. What is their inner motivation, which may never be expressed or never appreciated by others? And they go, well, I really want to make a difference in this area. And then you've got a conversation about something you both can do, or it's local, at least, we'll say, in the sense of the actors. And it may express some huge aspiration, saving the world in some particular way. But the fact is, there's two individuals sharing it, starting with a theme, discussing practical ways to do something about it, and then sharing inner motivations, personal motivations.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, my studies and interests have led me in the direction of somatic. In my natal astrology chart, I have no earth, all fire, water, air. So we always seek out what's missing, right? And the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. So I became a body worker and then somatic psychotherapy, the Hakomi method, and then the Tibetan Buddhist somatic breathing meditation. So I'm always interested in, and also my studies in Chiron, the centaur was part human and part animal, symbolizing that connection between the mind and spirit and the earth and the body. So applied to this theme, if the why, the what, and the how, the what, the how, and the why are aligned, what do you experience emotionally and physically when that alignment allows the speaking from life rather than script? Sort of, do you feel more relaxed? Do you get a cheer, or is your heart open, or whatever?
I'll just use one term and explain why.
All right.
When audio technology was coming to the consumer back in the 60s and 70s, there was a term called signal to noise ratio. And that meant how much static and interference did you have with the audio sound, which later applied to video as well.
Yes.
So when I focus on this, move from the what to the how to the why, I reduce the noise and I get a better signal, meaning what that person really feels and cares about.
Yeah.
And of course, bringing out what I feel strongly about too. So getting a better signal to noise ratio means reducing the noise and increasing the signal.
Exactly. Right. That's as a therapist, there are different kinds of therapies there, and Gestalt is a wonderful approach. And however, sometimes the danger is that it often will increase the signal. It'll say, now say that to the client, say that again, only louder, or stand up and say it and see what happens then. And it can be very revelatory. However, in the Hakomi method, we learned that principle of lowering the noise, exactly what you're talking about, so that we can hear the signal that's there. And the signal may be very small, at least until it's given some space and attention. So if there is a weak signal or a subtle nuance, how are we going to hear it if we're putting our own idea and our own perception across in a big, loud voice?
Well, there's a thing called a pause. And when you're using a telephone, there's no opportunity to pause. The person thinks they've lost the connection, unless you agree to pause when you're having a phone conversation. So when you're face to face, if you convey that, yeah, let's have a moment of pause, noticing, reflection, allow whatever is there to emerge and reduce the distractions and so on. Now, if you're driving, pausing might not work so well. So it often says on these various audios, do not use this while driving.
Exactly right.
Of course, the term multitasking, I remember when I first heard that term, I don't remember 20 years ago or longer, it was applied to women, that women were better multitaskers than men, managing children and kitchen and this and that. And men were these specialists who just like, let me focus on my one thing. So multitasking is overrated as a good thing. I think, and you teach it all the time, to be focused, to be quiet, to be observant, to respect what the body is telling you, and so on. And we need that several times a day in order not to get caught up in the push for more content and more reactions and responses.
Mhm. That's right. Just like we need an occasional sip of water or a little bit of food in our stomach to carry on with fortitude and so on, we need to have those little plugins. And if we don't get them, well, some people are more self-reliant and have techniques and tools and so on to bring that into their life, but a lot of people don't or don't have the time. But it's wonderful when we can have that moment of pause, even whether it's just silence or taking a deep breath, and then there can be a pivot. If something wants to emerge, like you're suggesting, we want to be able to follow that. And if we can pause, then the correct pivot can take place more easily. So we're running out of time, alas, but I just want to come back to that idea of living from life, living from a script, and also how do we think for ourselves? Because you mentioned that when we're speaking a couple of days ago that you might like to talk about that. And with the plethora of social media, many forms of information and sources versus the mainstream media, excuse me, how, if you had an 8-year-old child, for example, how would you teach that child to think for themselves, to learn to discern?
Okay. For the child, create the space and time so the child doesn't have to react to the adult. With the adult, I say, how long can you remain neutral before forming an opinion? In other words, take the time to notice, to research, to hear more of the context before you feel you have to adopt an opinion.
Mhm.
For the child is ready to go immediately into the activity. The child is not seeking 5 opinions.
Yes.
Should I
Right.
do this or shouldn't I, or whatever.
Yes.
And so you create the supportive environment for the child without interfering with the investigation of the curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So just going back to when we first met in Zoom, just for a couple of minutes before we pressed the record button, there was the option of having a conversation. What are we going to talk about in the interview? Get it all mapped out and have an agenda. And I suggested, well, why don't we just jump right in and trust that, between you and me and the third entity, which is the sum of the parts, there's enough information and maybe a drop of wisdom here and there, or something unexplainable or undiscovered that could emerge. And you said, well, okay, let's do it. Sort of like in improvisational theater, you have to have that curiosity and vulnerability and trust in one's voice. And that comes back to the identity thing again, of trusting that the truth will is there, and whatever the truth is, in any given situation and context and so on. But there is levels, or truthiness, as Stephen Colbert coined that term. There's always some truthiness, or maybe even the perfect or the ultimate, the optimal version of the truth for any given situation. So if we can calm down, listen deeply to ourselves first, and then to be able to do that with other people, and just trust that the whatever's supposed to happen can happen if we provide the right nurturing, safe environment.
And that, when I thought of this little this tagline for our conversation, at first I was tempted to say, are we speaking scripts or speaking truth? Then I decided, no, I'm not going to impose the word truth on anybody. I'm just going to call it speaking life and
Yeah.
let you figure out what's true. So I deliberately took the word truth out of there because it tends to create a pressure to form an opinion or adopt something that's being
Standard.
said.
Yeah.
And I wanted to release that pressure.
Mhm. Right. So one little question before we wind down. In relation to the internet and information and social media, etc., all kinds of media, how do you personally discern? Because I know, like almost everybody, you spend a fair bit of time researching and listening to different opinions and interviews like this, perhaps, and reading material. So, how do you wend your way through that avalanche or volcano of information?
Well, it is a constant choice or challenge to
Mhm.
choose.
Yeah.
We're all facing it, whether you subscribe or unsubscribe to certain things, whether you skim material, whether you put it on high speed for a video. There's different ways of managing, but can you step away for a day is the question. And with the mobile universe that we have here, chances are, well, I'll give you an example. I went to a university women's soccer game, daughter of friends of ours, and everybody there was on their device texting away and doing stuff. They couldn't even have a moment just to watch a live event without being, engaged in some other way.
Right. So
So,
how do you do it? What's your modus operandi on a daily basis of separating the wheat from the chaff?
well, I live in the country, so I think there's a little different pace here. That
Yeah.
I look out at the forest in behind and the river on the other side and so on.
Mm.
So that reminds me not to think that my desk, my computer is so important. The other thing is I have favorite people that I stay connected with, including yourself. And in that sense, I relate to our little tribe of well-wishers virtually without necessarily sending a note. And I feel, we've come through these changes over time, and we're going to use the best of what we have to support each other, support, the new collective that's emerging in the world, and so on. It's a constant challenge, and I'm not saying it's easy.
Mhm.
And I do spend more time than most people saving and organizing files and naming things and so on.
Mhm.
And I do it actually, I help a few other people do that because
Yeah.
I'm involved in the world of the blockchain. So I'm
Right.
actually teaching and mentoring people
Yeah.
to learn a new way of connecting around the world that is so much different and more efficient than the old ways.
Yes.
But it's new, and we compare it to what we know.
Right.
So when you present an idea, people want that idea to be familiar.
Sure. They
And
want
you're
something to
saying,
relate to, to build upon, and
yeah.
so
So
just how would you excuse me,
I'm building those bridges. So
building
that's what I'm
bridges, and
doing all the time.
you're sharing your, so you're a bit of a wise guy, so to speak. um a wise man. I'm just kidding. um so and you're of a certain age, and you've been interested in this phenomenon for a long time, so you've developed a certain prowess, shall we call it, in being able to discern what is good for you, for your mind and your heart. But to someone who is either a younger person, maybe like a child, or an adult who's overwhelmed with the media and so on, and is really feeling stressed out, and really hard for them to know how to go forward, what to believe, fake news, conspiracy theories, is there a little bit of advice you could give to that type of person to be able to protect themselves at least, or have a little bit of peace of mind and certainty in themselves and going forward, informationally speaking?
Yeah, get a dog.
Good.
A friend of ours has a beautiful border collie, and he visits us regularly. And when she travels, he stays with us. And I, I tracked how he operated, never tied. And I wrote a thing called a healthy day. And you wouldn't know it was about an animal until you get to the bottom of the page. But it was looking at the natural flow of movement and activity and self-care and so on, which we could all benefit from doing. So we have to detach from the tech and the
Yeah.
chair and everything else.
Do you have a dog, Eric?
No, I just rent one.
Okay. I don't have one either, but I do love them. But I know all the squirrels in the park next door. I know them all by name. So sometimes they come and
That's
I have a peanut or something, and they'll eat right out of my hand, right down to the
sure.
bones.
So I was
Yeah,
being a little cute saying getting a dog, but
that's a
it
great
really
idea.
means each one has to step out of their
Yeah,
little mold that they're in, whatever that is.
yeah,
Um, I won't give you my list. I've got a short list of things
yeah.
that make that difference, but it's for everyone to discover what resonates with their purpose so that they're not feeling pressured by all the noise and clutter of the
Mhm,
modern
mhm, mhm,
life.
mhm. Yeah, perhaps some sovereignty for each individual to believe that they have the right
Yeah.
to choose the protocols that feel right and can align them with that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Eric. I mean, we could go on, I'm sure, for a while, and maybe we'll have another conversation in the future and go into some of that list that you have. And I know you have a lot of applications of this general theme that we've been talking about today regarding health and the economy and so on.
Yeah.
So there are lots of side routes that we could take. So have a
Sure.
wonderful day. And it is Sunday, like the Sabbath, the Christians used to call it. Not for the
Day
Jews,
of
of course,
rest.
Saturday, but a day of rest. Yeah, I remember when I used to do marketing in Mexico City, a city of 25 million people, and just crazy. It's a city that was built for 5 million, but it has 25 million now. But on Sunday, everything closes except a few restaurants. And you can walk through the streets of downtown Mexico and they're silent. You can walk down the middle of the street and there are no cars. It's just beautiful. It was just like it used to be here.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, buddy.
Thanks
Good to
very
see
much,
you.
Hugh. I
Thanks a
appreciate the
lot.
invitation.
Thanks a lot for sharing. It was really great.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.